Okay, in this tutorial I'll cover how to use Maya to create several structural objects. We're going to make them modular so they can be used to create environments, and I'll cover the more common modeling tools used to create these structures. So first off, let's set up our scene. So I'm going to open a new scene over here. So in this scene, the first thing I want to do is go over and set our units. So Windows, Settings, Preferences, and then over here go to Settings, and I'll see centimeters are set here. I'm going to switch this to meters. In the US we usually use inches and feet and yards, I guess, but if you were to use these and you send these to Unity, the game engine, they're going to import in as decimal amounts of meters, so it's just more cleaner to use meters and measure everything in the meters. So I'm going to set that to meters and press save. You may notice that the grid has super zoomed out. So had we made a box centimeters, that would have been super tiny to scale to the meters range. We also want to change one thing on the exports. So if I go to File, Export Selection, and you don't have to have anything selected for this. If I click Export Selection, I want to set this to FBX. If this is still set to something like Maya, I'm not going to see the correct options. So set this to FBX because we're going to export in FBX. And scroll down until you find Advanced over here. And inside of the Advanced tab, you'll see Units. So expand out Units. And usually it's set to automatic. Uncheck automatic and set that to centimeters. This way it'll export out in centimeters, but we model in meters. This way when Unity gets it, it'll import in actual size. So you won't have to scale anything in Unity. It'll pop in whatever you scale here in Maya. If you scale a person at person height and you drop it into Unity, it'll import at the correct height on the first person controller or third person controller because it'll pop in real world units. So it's just a lot cleaner and easier to export back and forth from Maya to Unity by doing this. So you can press cancel at this point. The setting's already saved in there, so cancel that out. And we're good to go. So I usually start with a person. So if I click on a square, I can kind of see squares right here. So I'm going to set the Y scale to 2. 6 feet is roughly 2 meters. So that's the height of a person. I can move that person up on the ground plane by 1 meter to put them on the ground plane. And let's try a 0.3 right here and a 0.6, which is roughly about 1 foot by 2 foot. And that's usually what a person is going to look like in that shape. So I can kind of build everything to fit a person scale unit right here. And that way, exporting to Unity, everything will pop in correct to the character that we use there. You may also notice that there's a lot of glitching going on here, and if I zoom out even further, it starts to clip and disappear. That's because we've scaled the scale, and by making it larger, the camera is having issues with that. So if I go to View right here and select Camera, I'll click on that and pull up the attribute editor over here, which is this little guy, and it pulls up the attribute editor. I want to set the near clipping plane to 0.01 instead of 001. That adjusts the near clipping plane, so it fixes all the distortions now. And the far clipping plane, you can see that it's still clipping here. So if I set the far clipping plane from 100 to 1000, it gives it more space now to look farther away and doesn't look as close, so it doesn't cause that glitching distortion. So I can close this out now, click on that. Alright, and I usually use this one over here because that's my units. Alright, so I have the person right here. I can click on the person and everything I start building will now be in real world units. So let's go over to and start with something simple. Let's go with a floor. So I click on the plane button and I can go to the scale button, clicking R for scale. It's also right there. And then scale this outwards. You may notice that there's a lot of green lines or polygons. Let me turn off the grid so it's not distracting. So I click the grid button right here, turns that off. That's a lot more polygons than we need for a single ground plane. So if I click on the polyplane 1, which only appears if you're clicked on the object you want to change, I click on polyplane 1 and set that from 10 to, let's say, 1. So now it's only a single polygon. It's not going to lag the game too much. Actually, 100 polygons shouldn't lag your game. But you want to conserve polygons and not use them if you don't need them. The shape didn't change by reducing the polygons, so there was no need to keep them. I'm going to change the scale to something nice and clean and even. So let's do 10 for all 3 directions. And that would be a nice, clean floor plane. I could throw any texture I want on there when we get to texturing, and that would work as a ground. If I want to use it as a ceiling, I could duplicate it. Duplication is easy with Control D on the keyboard for duplicate, and you don't really see a change, but there's two planes sitting on top of it now. I can click the move direction and pull that upwards. The move tool is right there, so we have move, rotate, and scale. And so I want to rotate now. The shortcut is E for on the keyboard, or you can click the rotate button there. I'm going to rotate this a little bit this way, figure out what number is rotating, and set that to looks like minus, or actually just 180 would be all I need. Doesn't need to be minus. And so it finishes the rotation. So this is now possibly a ceiling. So really simple. We have a plane, a ceiling. We could export just one of these. We don't need to export both of these, and just put different textures on this different object, and you can have floors and ceilings pretty easily. The downside, however, is that you can notice that the surface is black. The black is because if I click on shading and click on backface culling, polygons are only one-sided. The plane is still here, but it's just invisible. If I reverse this direction, you can see the polygons there. So in Unity, this is what you'll see. You'll see a one-sided plane that is only visible from one direction. What Maya does is it allows you to see a black surface, so you know that the object's there, but in Unity in the game engine, you won't see that. So whether you want to leave this on backface culling, so you have invisibility, so what you see is in Maya is what you're getting in Unity, or you can leave a black surface. Either way works, but just to be aware, polygons are only one-sided. So what you can do in this case, or one of the side effects is you can walk through the single-sided polygon from one side in Unity, but the other side is going to block you, so you can't go back out. So it's kind of neat for trick walls or whatever. But sunlight will also go through one side, not the other. So you're going to have sunlight and shadows coming in on your surface, even though there's a ceiling on top of your house. So you may not want a single-sided plane. So what you could do is take this one and put it up, oops, duplicate again. So now I have one ceiling right here and one floor. They don't necessarily need to be connected. You could build your floors this way with single planes. So that's one option. I'm going to delete both of these. So again, all you need to do is export just one of these. You don't need to export the same thing. Just change out materials. What you could do is use a cube instead. And this way you can make let's say the floor out of a cube. So I can just go to scale, squash this down, pull this wide, and boom. Now I have the floor this way. The benefit is that it's one solid piece, easy to move around. The downside is if I throw wood grain on here for the floor and I want a white painted ceiling, the wood grain is also going to be on the side because it's the same object. So you'd have to go through and UV and texture map that separately if you wanted two different materials on the same object, or assign different materials to different faces. So both options work. There's multiple different ways, whatever feels easier for you, I suppose. But let's delete out that method. So that's floors and ceilings. Let's go over to simple walls. So I'm going to click on the square again and make a wall. So usually walls are, let's click the red arrow or the red box right here. This will scale in the Y green direction and the blue Z, so it'll stretch out that direction and squish it this way. So I'm not sure the mathematical equivalent on this is, but let's just say 15 centimeters, 0.15 is roughly a wall thickness. So let's say that's our wall thickness. Depending on whether it's cinder block or just 2x4 wood, let's say for wall height, you could go 2.6 or whatever, that's about 8 feet tall. Or pick a different number. So let's pull this up. And so 1.3 would be half of 2.6, so that puts it perfectly on the ground plane. So this would be a ceiling height for a person in a regular size house if you're aiming for that. So you could have this as a simple wall piece. If you're happy with these numbers, you can just go to Freeze Transformations, and it clears out everything. So now you have one modular wall piece. You can rename this thing to, let's say, Wall, and go to History and wipe out History. That clears out this part here. If I Control Z that out, you can see that it left some numbers in here. It's better to clear that out. Shift Z is redo. It clears that out. So now you have a nice clean piece going into Unity. What you also may want is to center the pivot downwards. So if I take the pivot and move it down, if I press Insert on the keyboard, this switches into pivot mode. I can drag this up and down, or if I want to snap it, I can hold the V key for vertex and then while I'm still holding the V key, click and drag this down, and it snaps to the nearest vertex. So it'll snap to any different vertex I'm clicking or hovering over while it's still selected. But once I let go of the mouse and then the V key, it'll lock downwards. And since I only held one direction, it only went one direction. If I were to hold the V key, click the center dot, I could snap it to any different vertex anywhere on here, which is really cool, but I just wanted to pull it downwards. So this way it keeps it centered, but also on the ground. And then press W to get out of that, or press insert again to switch out of insert mode. This way, when I put it in Unity, it'll automatically land on the ground at ground height. It's just easier to put the pivot on the bottom of objects that'll land on the ground. Alright, so once we have a wall, I can call that done and export that out. We'll still need to unwrap that, so I'll save unwrapping for later. Let's slide this over here, and that'll be a wall. So let's say I wanted another wall, but this time I want a wall with a door in it. So I'm going to Control D for duplicate, slide this over here, and I'll work with this guy. So let's say I want to put a doorway in here and cut a hole an opening for that. You may also notice that my tools right here may not match any of these tools or tabs you're clicking on. I have a custom tab right here, so I've put my own pieces or my own tools right here that I commonly use. If you wanted to find these specific tools, you can go over to any of these edit mesh tools, and they're right here. If you like a tool that you use often, let's say something like something that I don't usually use I don't even know what these things do. Connect, let's say. If you want to connect, hold Control and Shift and click on that, and it'll create this. And so now you have a shortcut for it on your custom toolbar. If you don't want that, you can right-click it and delete it back out. It's just a way of storing your more commonly used buttons, if you want that option. So I'm going to use the Swift Loop, or the Edge Loop right here. That's also located under Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop. So I'll click on that. And let's say I cut a line right here, and a line right here. And let's say I put a line right here. So that's roughly the size of a doorway. I didn't exactly measure to make sure it's exact, but I could measure if I wanted to. But it's generally art and whatever looks about right, unless you're aiming for mathematical architecture. I'll move this guy over here, and we can kind of see that that's roughly about the size of a doorway. If I want that a little bit larger, I can slide the edge. Let's say I right-click, go to Edge Mode. I can double-click on this edge. It grabs everything. If I don't double-click, let's say I click it once and twice, I can keep, if I hold Shift, keep going around and select everything, or just simply double-clicking an edge will select the whole edge. I can then slide it this way, left and right. There's also a slide edge tool, mesh tool, slide edge. I can click on this, hold the middle mouse button, and slide it. It's more for if you have curved surfaces. In this case, it's not curved surface, so I don't really need to do that. I could just manually slide it. And I can measure out a distance of another cube and then slide it to matching that cube, kind of like this, to give me an idea. But this works. So right-click back to object mode, and I have a rough doorway cut out. So to fit the doorway, let's move the person out of the way. And right-click, go to face mode. I can click once and delete. Delete on the keyboard, click this one, press delete on the keyboard, and there's one more piece down here, drag across and press delete. So now I've deleted out an opening for the doorway. Unfortunately, there is kind of a two-way wall, paper-thin area where it's been split apart. So let's right-click on this, go back to object mode, actually edge mode. Let's go to edge mode, and I can click on a new command called bridge. If I select, I want to go from edge 1 and hold shift and click on edge 2, so I'm going to go from edge 1 to edge 2. You can see they're both orange color selected. I go to edit mesh and bridge. It'll automatically bridge the gap between these two edges. So I can select this. G on the keyboard is to repeat the last command. So bridge, so put a bridge, there. Maybe I should turn off the ground plane. And select both of these right here, and G to repeat the last command, and it did that. So now I have a doorway. I can go right-click to object mode, and I have a new doorway. I've built up a new bit of history, which I don't necessarily want, so I can delete history. That's under Edit, Delete by Type, History. And I'm going to call this Wall with Door. and I don't need the history or the locations on here, but if I zero those out, it's just going to pop in right here, so it's the same place that this guy originally was also, so it doesn't necessarily matter about clearing out that, it's already zeroed out. So I can export this once I've unwrapped it and move it over here. So now I have some modularity getting created. So if I take this and press Control D, I can start building a house, putting this here, put this here. If I want another wall, Control D, put this here. I could rotate that if I wanted to put it here by 90 degrees and move it over here. So I can start, as you can see, building a house. But Control Z on those, I don't need all those. Let's say I wanted to put a window now. Also of note, not super important, but you can see how it has like a little pixelated kind of edge. You can click on, let's say, Anti-Aliasing right here, and that'll smooth that out to make it nice and clean if you wanted that. There's another button called Ambient Occlusion. If you click on this one, it'll give a little bit of shadows. It makes it a little easier to see what you're working on, which will help for the window part coming up now. So let's Control D to duplicate that and make a new one. Let's create a window hole now. So what I could do, also of note for the door, if I wanted to get rid of an extra polygon right here, you can see the face mode. I can delete this polygon because right now I have 1, 2, 3 polygons in this area. If I go to vertex mode, all I have to do is get rid of the vertex by moving it over to here. So instead of just dragging it over, there's a couple different ways of doing that. I can go over to Mesh Tools. Mesh Tools. Edit Mesh. I always forget what these things are because I always have them custom coded on my shortcut key or over there. Oh, it is here under Mesh Tools. Yep, Target Weld right there. So Target Weld. Also, I have it stored right. Actually, I don't have it stored there. There's another way to get to it. I'll show you guys. If you click here, so what Target Weld does while you're in vertex mode, I can click with the left mouse and drag over to here and say move the vertex to here, and it moves it. Click and drag up to here, and now what I have is I've deleted that or gotten rid of the polygon that was here, so I have 1, 2 instead of 1, 2, 3. So I've reduced an entire polygon. It's still 4-sided, which is great, and 4-sided here. So I'm conserving polygons, even though it's only a single polygon. It makes it a little bit cleaner and you have less. If you want to leave it like this, it should be fine, but if you're trying to reduce polygons, every little bit could help depending on how low poly you're trying to get it. So this makes a nice clean doorway. The same thing for the window now. If I go back to object mode and switch out to the window, I could go through Swift Loop again, and I could put some lines right here and say I want my window right here and then delete out a hole. But there's an easier way of doing this so I don't have all these extra lines. Also, if you're trying to delete lines, don't press delete on the keyboard. If you press delete, yes, it goes away, but notice that if I go to vertex mode, the vertices are still here. So you would have to manually go through and delete the vertices. So that can work, but there's a much easier way. Let's go back to here. Oops, object mode. Put that edge loop back in there. If I want to delete an edge that I don't want, hold the Control key and then press delete. If you hold Control and delete, it deletes the edge just like last time, but on vertex mode, it deletes the vertices with it. So usually it's more common to hold Control and press delete than it is just deleting an edge. If I was going to here and deleting this edge, there's no point in pressing Control delete because it's still going to delete the vertice here and here. You can't delete that edge if you don't select it. So in some cases you don't need Control delete, but in some cases it's easier to take a whole ring out with Control delete. Back to object mode. Oh yeah, I don't need these edges either. So double click, Control delete, and start over. So we're back to here. If I go to face mode and I don't just click once, but click and drag through there, and that'll grab both sides of the face because you're selecting through the object. If you only click one side, you only grab the one side. Then you can hold shift and grab the other side. But you want to have both sides selected. And then I go over to Extrude, which is also under Edit Mesh Extrude right here. If I click on this, don't grab any of the arrows. Just tap once on one of these scale buttons. You can see I have a square right here. If I click on this, it turns it into more of a cube. So now this is the 3-axis scale point. If I click back on the arrow, it'll switch back to the 3-axis move. So this will move everything, which I don't want to do, so Control Z. Tap once on here, now I'm in scale mode, and now I can click and drag and scale this inwards. And since I have both sides selected, you can see that I've scaled both sides. But don't use the green arrow and pull it up, because yes, it works, but the other side is the other side is reversed, so your window is not very symmetrical at this point. So Control Z on that. What I usually do at this point is just switch out to the Move tool. W is a shortcut for that. It's also right there. Pull this straight up, and then I can switch out to R for scale, scale a little taller, maybe a little wider, W, move it down a little more, and let's just say I want the window somewhere about here. And because I'm using the Move tool and the Scale tool, it's keeping it the same on both sides. So now I can press Delete on the keyboard, and it deletes both of those faces and left me a window hole. The only thing left to do is bridge the insides. If I right-click back to Object Mode, I can go back to Bridge, and I don't need to necessarily grab all the edges this time, because these are the only open exposed edges. It should automatically figure out that it wants me to bridge these across. And as you can see, it put a nice window hole in there. If for some reason I didn't want the window hole, I could go back to Face Mode, click once here, hold Shift and click here, or actually hold Shift and double click. It'll select the whole perimeter along this way. If I click once, hold Shift, click once, I can keep manually going around as well, but it's easier just to, if you click twice on the same place, it'll grab everything, but clicking once, holding Shift, clicking the next one in line will tell Maya to go all the way around and continue the pattern around the ring. So if I delete out this and go to Object Mode, another option you might want to do at some later point, Edit Mesh, Fill Hole. So what Fill Hole does is it fills the hole. So if you ever need to fill a hole and close something up, you can do that. I don't want to fill the hole though, I want the window to stay in there, but if you ever need that button, there we go, back to Object Mode, and boom, I have a window hole. What we can also do is make this a little more realistic instead of just a regular window hole. Let's say I want to put a window in there. So I'm going to go with another cube. So I start with the cube, and let's kind of move that into place. Pull that up, and over here. So let's go to Scale, squash that inwards. I'm not exactly sure what I'm aiming for in the numbers, but I could take a ruler and start measuring my bedroom window if I wanted to know more exactly actual real-world measurements. Try and get this relatively close. It's generally art, so it doesn't have to be super perfect. Let's move this over here. And cool, I guess that's good enough for that direction. And scale it upwards. That's probably close enough. And then I might as well just go both directions out. So it kind of made it wider than the window itself. If I press 4 on the keyboard, that's wireframe mode. You can see through it now. It's 5 on the keyboard. We'll go back to shaded mode. They're also right here. So this is wireframe, and this one is shaded mode. Next one over is texture. We don't have texture. It won't do anything at the moment. So I have this, and let's repeat that same process again. Right-click, face mode, select through it. Control E on the keyboard is a shortcut for Extrude. If I tap on that once and then scale this in, I can scale in, let's say, the window frame, and then delete, Object Mode, Edit Mesh Bridge, and boom. Now I have a window opening. If I want to make this a little more interesting, I can go to Edge Mode, double-click this edge, double-click this edge, and we can go over to Edit Mesh Bevel. If I click on this, you can see it bevels it. The setting is a bit too high at the moment, so I'm going to slide that down to, let's say, 0.1. So that's basically clicking on the word and just dragging it across, and it'll scale your numbers differently. Once you're happy with that, just right-click Object Mode, and boom, we have a little more of a realistic window setting. I could also repeat the last command with G and slide that back down to 0.1, and now I have the inner bevel as well. So kind of like a window, I guess, and if I wanted to even it out, I could go to face mode and pull those in. But let's say I want to put a window inside there. So I've got the window frame. Let's go to square box again, move it over here, pull that straight up, scale it in, probably close enough. That should be good enough. And then make it about half the height of the window. Cool. That should work for about the one of the two panes of window glass. And repeat the process. Face mode, Control E for extrude. Click once for scale. Scale this in. Delete for face mode. Object mode. Edit mesh. Bridge. And then right click object mode. Click on this. Control D for deselect. Or Control D for duplicate. And pull this upwards, and looks like I'm a little bit off, but pretty close. So let's pull this one forwards and push this one backwards. And that's roughly, let me delete the ground. Let's move the ground plane over there. Cool. So now I have more or less a window. And by having this ambient occlusion on here, it makes it a little easier to kind of see what I'm looking at by having these shadows go on there. So if I wanted to adjust this a little more, I could pull this down so it sets a little bit lower. Maybe pull this up. Or go into right-click vertex mode and pull the vertices down to match the other height. So I have a nice window set inside of my window frame. Cool. Once I'm happy with that, I can take the whole thing and just delete out the history and freeze the transformations and start naming this window wall, or wall window. I can call, actually I can take this and this, since they probably won't ever move, and I could combine them together, or I could leave them separate in case I want to put this window type in a different window. However you want to do that. This would be like a window frame, these would be the two window panes, and you could group this into one big group and export that together, and then export this separately, and so you'd have different pieces. So I'll leave them separate in case I want to mix and match windows at a later point. So I'm just going to slide that over there, and I have that. So I've got a floor plane, wall, a door, and a window. And I can make sure everything fits because there's an actual person size, so I have an idea of if I can fit this guy through it, then my first person or third person in Unity should fit also, because everything should export correctly. So the last thing, let's make an arch, because that could be helpful to have. So I'm going to click the cylinder and then rotate this by 90 degrees. Again, I don't need to use the negative because it'll just flip the other direction for me. And then let's move this over here outside of the guy. And then let's scale this a little bit thinner. And let's say I click on the poly cylinder, I get some extra features. I'm going to set the subdivision cap to 2. That'll give me an extra ring inside of here. You can add a lot more if you wanted to. Double click on the ring, go to the other side, double click on that side, and then go to scale. I'm not going to use the middle one because that'll pull it outwards. You can see it's expanding outwards. I just want to use the green one so I can slide it up there and it doesn't make it balloon outwards. Then go to face mode, select all the bottom faces and delete, all the middle faces and delete, and I now have an arch. It still isn't closed, so I can try and go the same thing as before to bridge, but it's not going to work because it doesn't know what part connects to what. So here I can go to edge, double click this one, which selects the entire border edge, hold control, get rid of that one, and now it should figure it out. So mesh, add a mesh, bridge, and it should go right through. So if I click off that, go to right click, object mode, I can see I have a nice arch. Right here you can see that there's a bunch of hard edges right here. If I want a smooth inner arch, I can go to edge mode, click this one, go over to this one, hold shift and double click, and it'll select all the edges in between. Then I can go to, it's also right here for me, but mesh display, there's hardened edge and softened edge. Right now it's already hard. If I click on soft and click off of there and go to object mode and click off of that, you can see it rounded it, so it's much smoother. It didn't change the polygons, they're still there, it just made them look rounded. And the same thing right here, right now it's soft. If I were to use my shortcut right here and click hard edge, you can see everything turns hard. So Control Z on that, soft edge is a rounded bit. Cool. Now I don't want to round everything. If I click smooth on the whole thing, you're going to get some distortions because it's trying to round everything. So Control Z on that. Let's say I wanted to make, let's say, I'll make a copy of this guy. So Control D for duplicate, slide him over here. Say this guy's going to be like a Roman arch. I could insert an edge loop, so I click on edge loop right here, and kind of pick a center point right there and right there. Then go to face mode, select everything through the middle so I have everything selected. Then Control E for extrude, and grab the blue arrow because that'll pull all the directions outwards. And at this point, just right click, go back to object mode, and click off of it. And I have a nice capstone sitting in there for like a Roman style arch. If I want more of like a Gothic kind of arch, I could go over here, click on this, and let's say if I'm going to make a lot of elaborate changes, I don't need the other half. So if I go to face mode, select these, and delete, I can mirror it later after I've made some changes. It saves me the effort of trying to get exact on both sides. So in vertex mode, I'm going to take these vertices and pull these upwards. And then I'm going to take, let's say, this group and slide it slightly over. It may not be very accurate, so that's where comes in with the edge sliding. So I can go back to edge mode, double click, and click on the slide edge, which is under Mesh Tool Slide Edge. And what it says is use the middle mouse and you drag, click and push down the middle mouse, and you can see it slides along an edge wherever it's at. So it keeps the same curvature and just kind of moves it. So I'm going to move it a little back to the insert edge loop, which is right here under Mesh Tools, insert edge loop. I'm going to put an edge loop here and then go to the move tool. Shortcut is W. Oops. Well, that's annoying. All right, so it crashed. Okay, we're going to switch back out to the other one that's already finished. So what I have here is essentially I put the edge right here, and I put a couple more edges and I just kind of pulled them up by going to edge mode, double clicking and pulling them up and down, and it did that. I also put, to make it look a little more interesting, a bevel on it. So if there wasn't a bevel, you can kind of picture just a wall like this with a hard edge. I just went to edge mode, double clicked it, and then the shortcut to get to bevel, instead of going to edit mesh bevel, you can just hold the shift key, hold the right click, and there's bevel right there. So I click on bevel and then slide this down to an angle you like and you get a nice bevel. So that's how I got the bevel on this from the original Roman arch style, which was this. I also did the bevel on all those pieces, so it makes it a little more interesting. You can see there's still a lot of facets to it, each hard edge. If I wanted it to be a smoother arch, I'd have to add more polygons when I originally created the object by over here clicking on this polycylinder and upping the subdivision something higher, and that would have made more of these rounded. So let me get rid of that guy. Oops, object mode. Cool. And the last thing I want to cover is how to make a little pillar right here. So these little pillars could be interesting. You can make these modular also and kind of put them around, or just make these really big if you wanted a larger style pillar. To make that, I just simply went to the pillar, or the cylinder, slide this over here, and let's make this taller. I'm not sure the person size, but you can figure that out based on scales and stuff, however tall you want your Greek Roman arch to be. So edge loop, let's put an edge loop right here, and then go to face mode, click once, hold shift, double click next to it, it grabs the whole ring of them, Control E for extrude, pull the blue axis, which pulls all of them out, and then right click, go to edge mode, double click the edge, hold shift, hold right click, and you can get to the shortcut for bevel, and you have a nice ground for that. Let's repeat that. Let's put something on the top. So swift loop or edge loop. 3ds Max calls it swift loop. So Maya calls it edge loop. So put an edge loop there, and let's put an edge loop right there. Sure, why not? So let's go to face mode. Click once, double click next to it. Click once, double click next to it, and I have the whole top now. Control E for extrude. Pull the blue axis out just a little, and then click off it and repeat. Control E, pull it a little. Alright, and then edge mode, double click on this guy, bevel, and let's go double click this edge and pull it up a little. So I have a little bit of an interesting pillar at this point. So you can play with whatever shapes you want. It's just simply just finding the quick ways of selecting the pieces you want to start moving around. If I wanted to put, let's say, a hole in here, let's go to face mode, click on 1, 2, and just keep going around every other one. Not necessarily the hole, but the fluting. Okay, so I have the whole perimeter selected. Control E is a shortcut for extrude. Grab the, actually before I do that, let's scale slightly down and slightly in. So I've kind of rounded it a little bit. Well, actually, it's not really rounded yet, but take the blue at that point and then push it back just a little. And then go object mode, and I have some nice fluting in here. So a rather interesting, possibly complex shape from a simple cylinder just by pushing and pulling some edges that I was creating. And that more or less creates an array of items that you can move around, scale, make sure you wipe out your history, edit, delete by type history. You don't need that in Unity. Freeze transformations under modify freeze transformations, and that clears those out, and everything's good. Put a name for that pillar, and you're good to export. So that's pretty much how all the simple shapes work. Let's move into a couple of the advanced shapes. So I've also built this castle size or castle piece. It's about 27 modular pieces. If I select all these pieces, I've moved them off to the side, but I can set them back together over here. So as you can see, I have a relatively simple but interesting castle. It's all modularly built, so Control D for duplicate. I can move this over here and start creating all the walls. I have a rafter right here, Control D, and I can start putting that right there. And just start copying and pasting and reusing some of these to finish up the roof. So how I built all these pieces, let's Control Z this back out to over there. Keep things organized. Let's say the floor plane is just pretty much cutting a shape that I was looking for. You could use the cut tool, which is this one right here, also located under, not the FX tab, modeling. Edit mesh, mesh tools, multi-cut. So it's the multi-cut option right there. If I click on this, I could say I want to go from here to, if I hold the shift key, it'll find the center point. I can click on that, or I can keep dragging while holding it, and it'll give me different percents. So I'll do 50% there, enter, click right here, hold shift, click right there, enter, and then I can go to, let's say, edge mode. This one, Control E for extrude. I'll pull the green, I guess, and then pull both directions out, and then I can kind of adjust the vertex snapping. Vertex mode, this one, if I want to, let's say, pull it till it matches this direction so it's not kind of caved in, I can hold V, grab this direction and pull until I match it with that one, and then still holding V, grab this one and pull until it hits that one. So now it's matched to each vertex, and I've kind of created more of a elaborate shape. So this way it keeps as few polygons as I can work out. They're either 4-sided or 3-sided. 4 is preferable, but 3 works also. So that's generally how I built the floor shape. The walls, let's say over here, is pretty much the same thing I saw before, but I've built a rounded arch, and I combined another piece into it. Over here is the same process again, but with a slight chimney built in, and extruding out kind of the window right here. And over here is another piece. Let's put that over there. So it's the same kind of wall shape again, but kind of pushing this out and putting a window in here. I can rebuild this one relatively quickly to give an idea of how that was built. If I take actually, instead of a plane, I'll just take a box. I guess plane would work better. I'll start the plane, rotate 90 degrees up, and then scale it a bit bigger. Get rid of all those segments down to 1, and scale it a bit smaller. Once you figured out the height, I'm just kind of gauging at the moment, but you put your person here and get your numbers of what you wanted for person height. Let's go with edge, Control E for extrude that edge upwards, and then scale it inwards. And something roughly like this was how I got the initial shape. If I want that extra edge in there, I can go back to Insert Edge Loop, pop that in there, R for extrude outwards, and I've got a little more of the rounded shape. Let's say I want to put the window in there. I can go back to face mode and Control E for extrude, click on that and scale that in. I've scaled in all directions. I want to put this on the ground though, so I'm going to I guess go to face mode, click on this one, delete, then go to vertex mode, select both of these, W for move, hold the V key and pull it straight down until it hits the ground. Now I've locked it onto the ground area. So at this point I want to extrude. So back to face mode, Control E again to extrude and push back. So now I have that. Then face mode and delete that face. So I have more or less the right shape. If I want to get more of that pointiness, it's pretty much just putting a line down here and a couple more segments out there to distort that shape. To get my thickness, what I did is I went back to, actually I did one more thing, put the window in there. So face mode, extrude that in again, up, and delete. So now I've got the window. Alright, so if I want to put a thickness in here, go back to object mode, and since I built it with a single plane rather than a big thickness to give me a shape that I was looking for without having too many intersections, I can press Control D, duplicate, push this back out a little so I have, let's say, a 2-foot thick stone castle wall. Go back to face mode, and let's say this one and this one need to be wider so that they're not, you can see, intersecting there. So pull that wider and take this one, W for move, pull that up, and now I have some stone wrapping around there, and that should work. Then the last thing to do is just connect these two. So select both of them, mesh, combine, it makes them one single piece, and then I can go with edge, double click, or I guess I don't need all of it to be extruded backwards. The bevel, the bridge might be able to figure it out, so we can try edge, bridge. Yeah, it couldn't figure it out. So let's go to edge, and let's say this one, edit mesh, bridge, and it looks like it got them backwards. So I'm going to manually do this. What you can do is click once here and once here, and it looks like it went the other direction I wanted to go up. So manually click up until you get these sides. So once you've selected all these sides, you can press Control E, and then I usually use W at this point, hold the V key for vertex snap and pull it forward, and it should snap it right against that wall. So now it's, if I pull it back, you can see it snapped it right to there. If I go to vertex mode, I can select all the vertices and then merge them. So I want to go to mesh, edit mesh, merge. There's a fast way of finding this again for me. If you click on the merge, the shortcut is holding shift, holding right click, and merge vertices. And then there's merge. So holding shift and right click is usually quicker to find a whole bunch of those commands that I use. But merge vertices, if I click on this, by default, these settings are going to be 0.01, and that means anything within a 0.01 will be merged. If I make this number too high, it'll start, or I have to manually type that in. 1, okay, 10. I guess not. If you get too high, usually it starts crunching everything in because you have too high of a number. But 0.01 should be enough because they're overlapping. So if I press move, you can see that it welded it. If I didn't do the merge vertices, let's say I unselected all this, Control Z a bunch of times, you can see they're not actually connected. So that's why I selected everything, right click, holding shift, and go to merge vertices, and now it merged those pieces so that they're one solid piece. Cool. Also of note, notice how this one side is black on the back side? That's inverted polygons. So the shading again, back face calling, you can see that it's that one side of the wall is invisible, it's inside out. So let me shading back to black. If I want to flip these, I go to face mode. I can click the whole thing once, but that grabs everything, so I'm just going to manually click the faces I want. Boom. And that should be all the faces I need. And then go to reverse normals, which is this one. It's under mesh display, reverse, and that'll flip the direction of the one-sided polygons. So now I can go back to object mode. That's probably why the bridge was reversing in an X shape, because they were inside out. So now I have a wall. There's no need to put polygons in the bottom because this is going to sit on the ground and no one's ever going to look under the edge of the wall, so there's no need to put polygons. This saves you on the unwrapping time. This as well needs to be extruded out. So I can go to edge, double click, and edit mesh, bridge. And it should bridge that together for me. So now I have the window. It's not as elaborate of a shape, but you can generally get the idea that I cut some more pieces in there, and that's how I built that shape. And the rest of the wall is in the same pattern. Some other interesting parts and pieces, you can see that this is pretty much just a bunch of squares with some bevels on there to create the balcony. That's a box with a little bit of an extra piece kind of modeled on there, so it looks like a plywood top. This is originally just a long cube with an edge loop cut and an edge loop cut, and then extruded downwards. And then I did some extra extrudes to punch out the front and then pull out the top. That's just a square with some bevels on it. The ceiling, I've cut a section out of that for the purpose of it intersecting with the stairwell over there. But the original one was just this one, which again is just taking a piece. I could use a single plane if I want to. Let's say, go with plane over here, switch that back to 1. Let's rotate that upwards and then move it upwards. And I can start creating the plane, but in this case it might be easier to use the existing shape. So I want the roof to match this, so I'm going to Control D to duplicate, slide this over here, go to right click face mode. I want to keep this one, and this one, and then once I've selected this, if I hold shift and drag with the left mouse across everything, it'll reverse my selection. If I hold shift again and do that, it reverses it again. If I hold control, it deletes. It doesn't delete, it deselects. Control Z. If I hold control and shift at the same time, it'll grab everything. So holding shift will reverse selections, holding control will deselect only, and holding control shift will always select. It won't reverse your selections. So that's one way of doing that. So I'm going to just hold shift regularly, select it, and delete, and that leaves me with just the roof angle. Let's go back to object mode and cut, hold shift and click right here so I can divide that out evenly, go to face mode and delete that off. So now I have, back to object mode, a perfectly fitting roof line to my piece, and when I make a second copy and spin it around the other direction, I should match exactly to the other side, assuming I clear out my numbers and make them even, and oops, not 18, 180. And slide it that way. So they'll match eventually if I keep playing with the numbers. So that makes that. And then once I have that, all I have to do is extrude out the other side. So Control E for extrude and use the blue arrow, pull it out, and now I have a wall thickness or a roof thickness. And then let's go to object mode and scale it wider. And I can go to center pivot if I want. That's under modify center pivot. Kind of puts a little more in the center. And that's essentially that piece over there. But there's a couple extra supports on there, which is pretty much just a cylinder. Move this over here. And then let's scale that really small. And then move it upwards. And let's make it smaller. So just pretty much a few inches. And because it's so thin, I don't need a lot of these polygons. So I'm going to set this to 8. So I have 8 polygons. I'm going to rotate this down until it matches the same angle. And then let's scale it down a little. By default, my scale is matching whatever my angle is. It's because it's set to local. If you want to change that, you can hold the scale button, which is R, and then hold left click, and it allows you to change, do you want to set to object or world? If I set it to world, my scale will scale this direction to world. But I like having it local so I can scale it with the object. So holding R, holding left, I can set it back to object, so now it'll scale in proportion to the object itself. So I'm going to scale it down a little. Move in this case is set to world, so I'm going to hold W, hold left click and set that to object, and I can slide that down along the axis. Scale it up a little more and push it halfway into the wall. And if I'm happy where it's aiming at, then I can go to face mode and select the faces that I'll never see. Because it's sitting inside the wall, actually let's push it a little further back there. And then let's go face mode. Full on the keyboard shows me wireframe, and I can select all of these top ones and press delete. So I'm only seeing the part that I'm needing to see. Let's delete the ones on the bottom as well. Delete. Right click, object mode, 5 puts me back in shaded mode, and essentially I have one of these. Let's pull that back up a little more, push that back in, rotate that, and I can keep playing with it to get it more of an exact match. But once I'm happy with wherever that's at, Control D, make another one, Control D for another one, and another one. And that's essentially how I built all the inner pieces right there, and just kept making those half-sided pieces and putting them in here. So if I were to go to face mode and pull this out, you can see that it's just half-sided pieces just sitting on top of here. And so you don't need to actually connect them to the pieces. They're all combined at this point, so once I'm happy with that shape, I can go select everything, mesh, combine, and now if I click on it, it's one piece. If I want to separate those back out, let's say this one, mesh, separate, we'll re-separate them back out, and now I can go to object mode and click each of these pieces by themselves. By re-separating, the pivot ends up back over there on the middle of the, actually no, pivot ended up down here. So I can pull this back out, and I have all these separate pieces now. So you can see that it was just the same process to create that. So all these pieces are pretty much just piece by piece put together, depending on what you're looking for. That's kind of a square with the backside cut off because you'll never see it. It's another square with some bevels on there. And the rafter, again, just take one of these pieces and delete out these pieces, squish it in, and adjust it a little more. And that's pretty much how I've built all these pieces. So when they're all put back together, zero that back out. They create, let's move that guy out of the way. They create a nice house. And I guess because I separated him, he didn't pop back in place. But if I press 6 on the keyboard, put this in texture mode, I've already gone through and unwrapped and textured it. So this is the end result of what is being aimed for, is putting together a bunch of pieces that we can color and put together. So the next part of the video is going to be on how to unwrap and create the patterns. UV editor unwrapping right here. If I click on this piece, you can see that it's been unwrapped and laid out with a stone texture. Same thing with the floor, it's been unwrapped and placed together for that. So that's the next part. Hopefully this made enough sense with how to build structures in Maya.